Chapter 15, Further Up and Further In. Know, O warlike kings, said Emeth, and you, O ladies, whose beauty illuminates the universe, that I am Emeth, the seventh son of Harfa Tarkin, of the city of Tehishban, westward beyond the desert. I came lately into Narnia with 29 others under the command of Rishta Tarkin. Now, when I first heard that we should march upon Narnia, I rejoiced, for I had heard many things of your land and desired greatly to meet you in battle. But when I found that we were to go in disguised as merchants, which is a shameful dress for a warrior and the son of a Tarkin, and to work by lies and trickery, then my joy departed from me. And most of all, when I found we must wait upon a monkey, and when it began to be said that Tash and Aslan were one, then the world became dark in my eyes. For always since I was a boy, I have served Tash, and my great desire was to know more of him, and, if it might be, to look upon his face. But the name of Aslan was hateful to me. And as you have seen, we were called together outside the straw-roofed hovel night after night, and the fire was kindled, and the ape brought forth out of the hovel something upon 4 legs that I could not well see. And the people and the beasts bowed down and did honor to it. But I thought, the Tarkin is deceived by the ape, for this thing that comes out of the stable is neither Tash nor any other god. But when I watched the Tarkin's face and marked every word that he said to the monkey, then I changed my mind. For I saw that the Tarkin did not believe in it himself. And then I understood that he did not believe in Tash at all. For if he had, how could he dare to mock him? When I understood this, a great rage fell upon me, and I wondered that the true Tash did not strike down both the monkey and the Tarkin with fire from heaven. Nevertheless, I hid my anger and held my tongue and waited to see how it would end. But last night, as some of you know, the monkey brought not forth the yellow thing, but said that all who desired to look upon Tashlan, for so they mixed the 2 words to pretend they were all one, must pass one by one into the hovel. And I said to myself, doubtless this is some other deception. But when the cat had gone in and had come out again in the madness of terror, then I said to myself, surely the true Tash, whom they called on without knowledge or belief, has now come among us and will avenge himself. And though my heart was turned into water inside me because of the greatness and terror of Tash, yet my desire was stronger than my fear. And I put force upon my knees to stay them from trembling, and on my teeth that they should not chatter, and resolved to look upon the face of Tash, though he should slay me. So I offered myself to go into the hovel, and the Tarkin, though unwillingly, let me go. As soon as I had gone in at the door, the first wonder was that I found myself in this great sunlight, as we all are now, though the inside of the hovel had looked dark from outside. But I had not time to marvel at this, for immediately I was forced to fight for my head against one of your own men, one of our own men. As soon as I saw him, I understood that the monkey and the Tarkin had set him there to slay any who came in if he were not in their secrets, so that this man also was a liar and a mocker and no true servant of Tash. I had the better will to fight him, and having slain the villain, I cast him out behind me through the door. Then I looked about me and saw the sky and the wide lands and smelled the sweetness. And I said, by the gods, this is a pleasant place. It may be that I came into the country of Tash, and I began to journey into the strange country and to seek him. So I went over much grass and many flowers, and among all kinds of wholesome and delectable trees, till lo, in a narrow place between two rocks, there came to meet me a great lion. The speed of him was like the ostrich, and his size was like an elephant's. His hair was like pure gold, and the brightness of his eyes like gold that is liquid in the furnace. He was more terrible than the flaming mountain of Lagur, and in beauty he surpassed all that is in the world, even as the rose in bloom surpasses the dust of the desert. Then I fell at his feet and thought, surely this is the hour of death, for the lion, who is worthy of all honor, will know that I have served Tash all of my days, and not him. Nevertheless, it is better to see the lion and die than to be a Tisrak of the world and live and not to have seen him. But the glorious one bent down his golden head and touched my forehead with his tongue and said, son, thou art welcome. But I said, alas, Lord, I am no son of thine, but the servant of Tash. He answered, child, all the service thou hast done to Tash, I account as service done to me. Then the reason of my great desire for wisdom and understanding, I overcame my fear and questioned the glorious one and said, Lord, is it then true, as the ape said, that thou and Tash are one? The lion growled so that the earth shook, but his wrath was not against me, and said, it is false, not because he and I are one, but because we are opposites. I take to me the services which thou hast done to him, for I and he are of such different kinds that no service which is vile can be done to me, and none which is not vile can be done to him. Therefore, if any man swear by Tash and keep his oath for the oath's sake, it is by me that he has truly sworn, though he know it not, and it is I who reward him. And if any man do a cruelty in my name, then though he says the name Aslan, it is Tash whom he serves, and by Tash his deed is accepted. Dost thou understand, child? I said, Lord, thou knowest how much I understand. But I said also, for the truth constrained me, yet I have been seeking Tash all my days. Beloved, said the glorious one, unless thy desire had been for me, thou wouldst not have sought so long and so truly, for all find what they truly seek. Then he breathed upon me and looked away the trembling from my limbs and caused me to stand upon my feet. And after that, he said not much, but that we should meet again, and I must go further up and further in. Then he turned him about in a storm of and flurry of gold and was gone suddenly. And since then, O kings and ladies, I have been wandering to find him, and my happiness is so great that it even weakens me like a wound. And this is the marvel of marvels, that he called me beloved, me who am but as a dog. Eh? What's that? Said one of the dogs. Sir, said Emeth, it is but the fashion of speech which we have in Callerman. Well, I can't say it's what I like very much, said the dog. He doesn't mean any harm, said an older dog. After all, we call our puppies boys when they don't behave properly. So we do, said the first dog. Or girls. Shh, said the old dog. That's not a nice word to use. Remember where you are. Look, said Jill suddenly. Someone was coming, rather timidly, to meet them. A graceful creature on 4 feet, all silvery gray, and they stared at him for a whole 10 seconds before 5 or 6 voices said all at once, Why, it's old Puzzle. They had never seen him by daylight with the lion's skin off, and it made an extraordinary difference. He was himself now, a beautiful donkey with such a soft gray coat and such a gentle, honest face that if you had seen him, you would have done just what Jill and Lucy did. Rushed forward and put your arms around his neck and kissed his nose and stroked his ears. When they asked him where he had been, he said he had come in at the door along with all the other creatures, but he had, well, to tell the truth, he had been keeping out of their way as much as he could, and out of Aslan's way, for the sight of the real lion had made him so ashamed of all that nonsense about dressing up in a lion skin that he did not know how to look anyone in the face. But when he saw that all his friends were going away westward, and after he had had a mouthful or so of grass, and I've never tasted such good grass in my life, said Puzzle. He plucked up his courage and followed. But what I'll do if I really have to meet Aslan, I'm sure I don't know, he added. You'll find it will be all right when you really do, said Queen Lucy. Then they went forward together, always westward, for that seemed to be the direction Aslan had meant when he cried out, Further up and further in. Many other creatures were slowly moving the same way, but that grassy country was very wide, and there was no crowding. It still seemed to be early, and the morning freshness was in the air. They kept on stopping to look round and to look behind them, partly because it was so beautiful, but partly also because there was something about it which they could not understand. Peter, said Lucy, where is this, do you suppose? I don't know, said the High King. It reminds me of somewhere I can't give it a name. Could it be somewhere we once stayed for a holiday when we were very, very small? It would have to have been a jolly good holiday, said Eustace. I bet there isn't a country like this anywhere in our world. Look at the colors. You couldn't get a blue like the blue on those mountains in our world. Is it not Aslan's country? Said Tyrion. Not like Aslan's country on top of that mountain beyond the eastern end of the world, said Jill. I've been there. If you ask me, said Edmund, it's like somewhere in the Narnian world. Look at those mountains ahead, and the big ice mountains beyond them. Surely they're rather like the mountains we used to see from Narnia, the ones up westward, beyond the waterfall. Yes, so they are, said Peter. Only these are bigger. I don't think those ones are so very like anything in Narnia, said Lucy. But look there. She pointed southward to their left, and everyone stopped and turned to look. Those hills, said Lucy, the nice woody ones, and the blue ones behind, aren't they very like the southern border of Narnia? Like, cried Edmund after a moment's silence. Why, they're exactly like. Look, there's Mount Pyre with his forked head, and there's a pass into Archenland and everything. And yet they're not like, said Lucy. They're different. They have more colors on them, and they look further away than I remembered, and they're more, oh, I don't know. More like the real thing, said the Lord Diggory softly. Suddenly, far sight, the eagle spread his wings, soared 30 or 40 feet up into the air, circled round, and then alighted on the ground. "Kings and queens," he cried, "we have all been blind. We are only beginning to see where we are. From up there, I have seen it all. Etten's Muir, Beaver's Dam, the great river, and Cair Paravel still shining on the edge of the eastern sea. Narnia's not dead. This is Narnia." "But how can it be?" said Peter. "For Aslan told us older ones that we should never return to Narnia, and here we are." "Yes," said Eustace, "and we saw it all destroyed and the sun put out." "And it's all so different," said Lucy.
"The eagle's right," said the Lord Diggory. "Listen, Peter. When Aslan said you could never go back to Narnia, he meant the Narnia you were thinking of. But that was not the real Narnia. That had a beginning and an end. It was only a shadow or a copy of the real Narnia, which has always been here and always will be here, just as our own world, England and all, is only a shadow or copy of something in Aslan's real world. You need not mourn over Narnia, Lucy. All of the old Narnia that mattered, all the dear creatures, all of the dear creatures have been drawn into the real Narnia through the door. And of course, it is different as a real thing is from a shadow, or as waking life is from a dream."
His voice stirred everyone like a trumpet as he spoke these words, but when he added under his breath,
"It's all in Plato, all in Plato, bless me. What do they teach them at these schools?"
the older ones laughed. It was so exactly like the sort of thing they had heard him say long ago in that other world where his beard was gray instead of golden. He knew why they were laughing and joined in the laugh himself. But very quickly they all became grave again. For as you know, there is a kind of happiness and wonder that makes you serious. It is too good to waste on jokes. It is as hard to explain how this sunlit land was different from the old Narnia as it would be to tell you how the fruits of that country taste. Perhaps you will get some idea of it if you think like this. You may have been in a room in which there was a window that looked out on a lovely bay of the sea, or a green valley that wound away among mountains. And in the wall of that room opposite to the window, there may have been a looking glass. And as you turned away from the window, you suddenly caught sight of that sea or that valley all over again in the looking glass. And the sea in the mirror, or the valley in the mirror, were in one sense just the same as the real ones, yet at the same time they were somehow different, deeper, more powerful, more wonderful, more like places in a story. In a story you have never heard, but very much want to know. The difference between the old Narnia and the new Narnia was like that. The new one was a deeper country. Every rock and flower and blade of grass looked as if it meant more. I can't describe it any better than that. If ever you get there, you will know what I mean. It was the unicorn who summoned up what everyone was feeling. He stamped his right forehoof on the ground and neighed, and then cried, "Hey, I have come home at last. This is my real country. I belong here. This is the land I have been looking for all my life, though I never knew it till now. The reason why we love the old Narnia is that it sometimes looked a little like this. Bree! Come further up. Come further in." He shook his mane and sprang forward into a great gallop, a unicorn's gallop, which in our world would have carried him out of sight in a few moments. But now a most strange thing happened.
Everyone else began to run, and they found, to their astonishment, that they could keep up with him. Not only the dogs and the humans, but even fat little Puzzle and short-legged Poggin the dwarf. The air flew in their faces as if they were driving fast in a car without a windscreen. The country flew past as if they were seeing it from the windows of an express train. Faster and faster they raced, but no one got hot or tired or out of breath. Chapter 16, Farewell to Shadowlands. If one could run without getting tired, I don't think one would often want to do anything else. But there might be a special reason for stopping, and it was a special reason which made Eustace presently shout, "I say, steady, look what we're coming to." And well he might, for now they saw before them Cauldron Pool, and beyond the pool the high unclimbable cliffs, and pouring down the cliffs thousands of tons of water every second, flashing like diamonds in some places and dark glassy green in others. The great waterfall, and already the thunder of it was in their ears. "Don't stop! Further up and further in!" called Farsight, tilting his flight a little upwards.
"It's all very well for him,"
said Eustace, but Jewel also cried out,
"Don't stop! Further up and further in! Take it in your stride!"
His voice could only just be heard above the roar of the water, but next moment everyone saw that he had plunged into the pool, and helter-skelter behind him, with splash after splash, all the others did the same. The water was not bitingly cold, as all of them, and especially Puzzle, expected, but of a delicious foamy coolness. They all found they were swimming straight for the waterfall itself. "This is absolutely crazy," said Eustace to Edmund.
"I know, and yet,"
said Edmund. "Isn't it wonderful?" said Lucy. "Have you noticed one can't feel afraid, even if one wants to? Try it."
"By Jove, neither one can,"
said Eustace after he had tried. Jewel reached the foot of the waterfall first, but Tyrion was only just behind him. Jill was last, so she could see the whole thing better than the others. She saw something white moving steadily up the face of the waterfall. The white thing was the unicorn. You couldn't tell whether he was swimming or climbing, but he moved on higher and higher. The point of his horn divided the water just above his head, and it cascaded out into two rainbow-colored streams all round his shoulders. Just behind him came King Tyrion. He moved his legs and arms as if he were swimming, but he moved straight upwards, as if one could swim up the wall of a house. What looked funniest was the dogs. During the gallop, they had not been at all out of breath, but now, as they swarmed and wriggled upwards, there was plenty of spluttering and sneezing among them. That was because they would keep on barking, and every time they barked, they got their mouths and noses full of water. But before Jill had time to notice all these things fully, she was going up the waterfall herself. It was the sort of thing that would have been quite impossible in our world. Even if you hadn't been drowned, you would have been smashed to pieces by the terrible weight of water against the countless jags of rock. But in that world, you could do it. You went on, up and up, with all kinds of reflected lights flashing at you from the water, and all manner of colored stones flashing through it, till it seemed as if you were climbing up light itself, and always higher and higher, till the sense of height would have terrified you, if you could be terrified. But here it was only gloriously exciting. And then at last one came to the lovely, smooth green curve in which the water poured over the top, and found that one was out on the level river above the waterfall. The current was racing away behind you, but you were such a wonderful swimmer that you could make headway against it. Soon they were all on the bank, dripping but happy. A long valley opened ahead, and great snow mountains, now much nearer, stood up against the sky. Further up and further in, cried Jewel, and instantly they were off again. They were out of Narnia now, and up into the western wild, which neither Tyrion nor Peter, nor even the eagle had ever seen before. But the Lord Diggory and the Lady Polly had.
Do you remember?
They said, and said it in steady voices too, without panting, though the whole party was now running faster than an arrow flies. What, Lord? Said Tyrion. Is it then true, as stories tell, that you two journeyed here on the very day the world was made?
Yes,
said Diggory.
and it seems to me as if it were only yesterday.
And on a flying horse? Asked Tyrion. Is that part true?
Certainly,
said Diggory. But the dogs barked, faster, faster. So they ran faster and faster till it was more like flying than running, and even the eagle overhead was going no faster than they. And they went through winding valley after winding valley, and up the steep sides of hills, and faster than ever down the other sides, following the river and sometimes crossing it, and skimming across mountain lakes as if they were living speedboats, till at last, at the far end of one long lake, which looked as blue as a turquoise, they saw a smooth green hill. Its sides were as steep as the sides of a pyramid, and round the very top of it ran a green wall. But above the wall rose the branches of trees whose leaves looked like silver and their fruit like gold. Further up and further in, roared the unicorn, and no one held back. They charged straight at the foot of the hill, and then found themselves running up it almost as water from a broken wave runs up a rock out at the point of some bay. Though the slope was nearly as steep as the roof of a house, and the grass was smooth as a bowling green, no one slipped. Only when they had reached the very top did they slow up. That was because they found themselves facing great golden gates, and for a moment none of them was bold enough to try if the gates would open. They all felt just as they had felt about the fruit. Dare we? Is it right?
Can it be meant for us?
But while they were standing thus, a great horn, wonderfully loud and sweet, blew from somewhere inside that walled garden, and the gates swung open. Tyrion stood holding his breath and wondering who would come out. And what came out was the last thing he had expected. A little, sleek, bright-eyed talking mouse with a red feather stuck in a circlet on its head, and its left paw resting on a long sword. It bowed, a most beautiful bow, and said in its shrill voice,
Welcome, in the lion's name. Come further up and further in.
Then Tyrion saw King Peter and King Edmund and Queen Lucy rush forward to kneel down and greet the mouse, and they all cried out, Reepicheep! And Tyrion breathed fast with the sheer wonder of it, for now he knew that he was looking at one of the great heroes of Narnia, Reepicheep the mouse who had fought at the great battle of Veruna and afterwards sailed to the world's end with King Caspian the seafarer. But before he had had much time to think of this, he felt two strong arms thrown about him, and felt a bearded kiss on his cheeks, and heard a well-remembered voice saying,
What, lad, art thicker and taller since I last touched thee?
It was his own father, the good King Erlion, but not as Tyrion had seen him last when they brought him home, pale and wounded from his fight with the giant, nor even as Tyrion remembered him in his later years when he was a gray-headed warrior. This was his father, young and merry as he could just remember him from very early days when he himself had been a little boy playing games with his father in the castle garden at Cair Paravel just before bedtime on summer evenings. The very smell of the bread and milk he used to have for supper came back to him. Jewel thought to himself, I will leave them to talk for a little, and then I will go and greet the good King Urlian. Many a bright apple has he given me when I was but a colt. But next moment he had something else to think of, for out of the gateway there came a horse so mighty and noble that even a unicorn might feel shy in its presence, a great winged horse. It looked a moment at the Lord Diggory and the Lady Polly, and neighed out, What cousins? And they both shouted, Fledge, good old Fledge, and rushed to kiss it. But by now the mouse was again urging them to come in. So all of them passed in through the golden gates into the delicious smell that blew towards them out of that garden and into the cool mixture of sunlight and shadow under the trees, walking on springy turf that was all dotted with white flowers. The very first thing which struck everyone was that the place was far larger than it had seemed from outside. But no one had time to think about that, for people were coming up to meet the newcomers from every direction. Everyone you had ever heard of, if you knew the history of these countries, seemed to be there. There was Glimfeather the owl, and Puddleglum the marsh wiggle, and King Rillian the disenchanted, and his mother, the star's daughter, and his great father Caspian himself. And close beside him were the Lord Drinian and the Lord Burney and Trumpkin, the dwarf, and Truffle Hunter, the good badger, with Glenstorm, the centaur, and 100 other heroes of the great war of deliverance. And then from another side came Cor, the king of Archenland, with King Lune, his father, and his wife Queen Aravis, and the brave Prince Corin Thunderfist, his brother, and Bree the horse, and Hwin the mare. And then, which was a wonder beyond all wonders to Tyrion, there came from further away in the past the two good beavers and Tumnus the fawn. And there was greeting and kissing and handshaking, and old jokes revived. You've no idea how good an old joke sounds when you when you take it out again after a rest of 500 or 600 years. And the whole company moved forward to the center of the orchard, where the phoenix sat in a tree and looked down upon them all. And at the foot of that tree were 2 thrones, and in those 2 thrones a king and queen so great and beautiful that everyone bowed down before them. And well they might, for these 2 were King Frank and Queen Helen, from whom all the most ancient kings of Narnia and Archenland are descended. And Tyrion felt as you would feel if you were brought before Adam and Eve in all their glory. About half an hour later, or it might have been half 100 years later, for time there is not like time here, Lucy stood with her dear friend, her oldest Narnian friend, the fawn Tumnus, looking down over the wall of that garden and seeing all Narnia spread out below. But when you looked down, you found that this hill was much higher than you had thought. It sank down with shining cliffs, thousands of feet below them, and trees in that lower world looked no bigger than grains of green salt. Then she turned inward again and stood with her back to the wall and looked at the garden. I see, she said at last, thoughtfully. I see now. This garden is like the stable. It is far bigger inside than it was outside. Of course, daughter of Eve, said the fawn. The further up and the further in you go, the bigger everything gets. The inside is larger than the outside, Lucy looked hard at the garden and saw that it was not really a garden at all, but a whole world with its own rivers and woods and sea and mountains. But they were not strange. She knew them all. I see, she said. This is still Narnia, and more real and more beautiful than the Narnia down below, just as it was more real and more beautiful than the Narnia outside the stable door. I see. World within world, Narnia within Narnia. Yes, said Mr. Tumnus, like an onion, except that as you go in and in, each circle is larger than the last. And Lucy looked this way and that, and soon found that a new and beautiful thing had happened to her. Whatever she looked at, however far away it might be, once she had fixed her eyes steadily on it, became quite clear and close, as if she were looking through a telescope. She could see the whole southern desert, and beyond it, the great city of Tashbaan. To eastward, she could see Cair Paravel on the edge of the sea, and the very window of the room that had once been her own. And far out to sea, she could discover the islands, island after island to the end of the world, and beyond the end, the huge mountain, which they had called Aslan's country. But now she saw that it was part of a great chain of mountains which ringed round the whole world. In front of her, it seemed to come quite close. Then she looked to her left and saw what she took to be a great bank of brightly colored cloud, cut off from them by a gap. But she looked harder and saw that it was not a cloud at all, but a real land. And when she had fixed her eyes on one particular spot of it, she at once cried out, Peter, Edmund, come and look, come quickly. And they came and looked, for their eyes also had become like hers. Why, exclaimed Peter, it's England, and that's the house itself, Professor Kirk's old home in the country, where all our adventures began.
I thought that house had been destroyed, said Edmund.
So it has, said the fawn, but you are now looking at the England within England, the real England, just as this is the real Narnia. And in that inner England, no good thing is destroyed. Suddenly, they shifted their eyes to another spot, and then Peter and Edmund and Lucy gasped with amazement and shouted out and began waving, for there they saw their own father and mother waving back at them across the great deep valley. It was like when you see people waving at you from the deck of a big ship when you are waiting on the quay to meet them. How can we get at them? Said Lucy. That is easy, said Mr. Tumnus. That country and this country, all the real countries, are only spurs jutting out from the great mountains of Aslan. We have only to walk along the edge, upward and inward, till it joins on. And listen, there is King Frank's horn. We must all go up. And soon they found themselves all walking together, and a great bright procession it was, up towards mountains higher than you could see in this world, even if they were there to be seen. But there was no snow on those mountains. There were forests and green slopes and sweet orchards and flashing waterfalls, one above the other, going up forever. And the land they were walking on grew narrower all the time, with a deep valley on each side. And across that valley, the land which was the real England grew nearer and nearer. The light ahead was growing stronger. Lucy saw that a great series of many-colored cliffs led up in front of them like a giant's staircase. And then she forgot everything else, because Aslan himself was coming, leaping down from cliff to cliff like a living cataract of power and beauty. And the very first person whom Aslan called to him was Puzzle the donkey. You never saw a donkey look feebler and sillier than Puzzle did as he walked up to Aslan, and he looked beside Aslan, as small as a kitten looks beside a Saint Bernard. The lion bowed down his head and whispered something to Puzzle, at which his long ears went down. But then he said something else, at which the ears perked up again. The humans couldn't hear what he had said either time. Then Aslan turned to them and said, "You do not yet look so happy as I mean you to be." Lucy said, "We're so afraid of being sent away, Aslan, and you have sent us back into our own world so often." "No fear of that," said Aslan. "Have you not guessed?" Their hearts leapt, and a wild hope rose within them. "There was a real railway accident," said Aslan softly. "Your father and mother and all of you are, as you used to call it in the Shadowlands, dead. The term is over. The holidays have begun. The dream is ended. This is the morning." And as he spoke, he no longer looked to them like a lion, but the things that began to happen after that were so great and beautiful that I cannot write them. And for us, this is the end of all the stories. And we can most truly say that they all lived happily ever after. But for them, it was only the beginning of the real story. All their life in this world and all their adventures in Narnia had only been the cover and the title page. Now at last they were beginning chapter 1 of the great story which no one on earth has read, which goes on forever, in which every chapter is better than the one before.